So my name is Hunter Buen. I'm a floater, a store floater at New Seasons Market at Orenco Station. I've been working there for about 4 months now, although I've been shopping there for a very long time since I was very little. And my inclusion in the union drive, which started before I began there, was to try to help during the final push as a member of the organizing committee and to see the election through.
And so, what were the actual motives and inspirations for the union drive?
Yeah, the reasons for the union drive were very vast, and I had to realize that they were far greater in scope than I realized when I actually started at this store. I had a lot to learn since I came in at a rather late time. The first and biggest reason was the dissolution of certain departments in the store. There used to be specific departments. If maybe you've heard in the previous episode, if any listeners haven't, an episode with Chris from the Seven Corners New Seasons location discusses some of the things I'll be talking about today, but dissolution of departments such as promotions and bookkeeping and other departments which used to exist at New Seasons no longer do, and much of this downsizing and streamlining, if you will, came during the COVID era. And really it was the company trying to, again, streamline and to save some money by organizing their stores, so to speak. And in doing this, what they really did was they ended up demoting people who were former managers of those departments and forcing them to either leave the job or to continue to work at a job but take a pay cut in a different department. And this is the story that I've heard from at least 2 or 3 people at just my location. And of course, I've heard that it's happening at other locations as well. And so that's one of the big reasons. The second is the attendance policy, which I won't touch on as much because it was talked about in the previous episode. But just to quickly summarize, it's basically strategized to get you to use your PTO instead of accruing it and using it for actual vacation, which is what paid time off is supposed to be used for. It's a way to convince you to use it to cover your sick days. Very eminent of Whole Foods. And then finally, the last reason is really the acquisition by eMart and Good Food Holdings, because this company is really what pushed forward the previous 2 points, as well as they're trying to make the company more corporate. As many can tell, many of the 15 to 20-year employees are very lucid about how the company is changing, and many of them, as a result, supported the union efforts. There are other various reasons, but from what I could tell, those were the 3 biggest.
When you say they're making the store more corporate, do you have any examples of that? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, one that particularly bugs me, and this won't bug everybody, but it's the installation of self-checkout machines. It's something that I think it started with many of the much more corporate grocery stores, like owned by the Walton family or by Kroger. And of course, Amazon followed suit. I did work at Whole Foods for about 4 years and oversaw Amazon's acquisition of the company. And many of the same things that happened there are now happening here. Like I said, the attendance policy is now very eminent of what Whole Foods does and what Amazon does. The self-checkout machines tell me that they're trying to cut back on labor, the streamlining of departments. Just the general vibe in the store is changing because it feels more corporatized. And as the union drive began, those fears were just confirmed further because of the way the company acted during the union drive. Many of the same words they used, the same arguments they used, they looked literally exactly the same as you would find from any mega corporation like Amazon or Kroger.
Okay, so fast forward a little bit, and like right at the beginning of September, your store held its union election. Out of the 108 eligible voters, 60 voted against the union and 37 voted in favor of joining UFCW Local 555. We want to know what went wrong. Like, what are some of the reasons why you think you guys lost? Feel free to be as detailed as possible.
Yeah, of course. It was a very unfortunate outcome. We were very shocked. Many of the very ardent supporters in the store were shocked by the outcome. And I think they're really, after spending about a month, over a month, about a month, let's say, I'm losing track of time here, stewing on this result and trying to come to terms with it, I think I've come up with 4 good reasons as to why Orenco Station's election ended up going the way it did. And I put these reasons in order. They're all pretty detailed. Maybe we can discuss each one after it's over to try to get some more detail or if you have any questions. But I think it's important that they're in order because there are some reasons that are much more important, and some that are partially the reason why we lost, but I don't think that they're as big a reason. So first and foremost, again, writing off my previous point about the company emulating the strategy of other corporate entities, the first reason is company union busting. And it really all started when they hired a union busting law firm for probably tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that union busting law firm was Ogletree Deakins, who you may be familiar with if you're in the labor world, an infamous union busting law firm that has worked with Republican Party officials, including Donald Trump, in defending a labor movement at one of his Las Vegas hotels, if I'm not mistaken. So very negative reputation from this law firm. And the only reason a company would need to hire a law firm like that is to break the law and get away with it. And secondly, a mailer which was sent out, it was surprisingly detailed and well put together. I'm wondering how much money they spent on this mailer instead of giving it to the workers. But basically, the mailer they sent out was an attempt to propagandize their workers. They were sent out to everybody's homes in a giant green envelope that was impossible to miss. And the information inside of it was typical union busting type argumentation, right? It was the union can't guarantee you anything. It's a third party coming in and disrupting our lovely family, all those sorts of things. In addition, there was a separation between the UFCW 555, which was conducting the election at our store, and New Season's labor union, which Seven Corners and many other stores downtown in Portland are a part of. And the NSLU category on that mailer basically said you can't trust them to do anything because they are brand new, which is pretty slanderous, I would think. It's the workers. It's the workers that want these changes. And as for UFCW, they basically tried to compare our potential contract to Kroger's, which is a completely unfair comparison because each contract is unique to each store, as we know. And then another big point here is that the arguments that we tended to hear as organizers, which we can only think came from the company, we heard these arguments so many times, but they're just absolutely baseless, and we don't know who created them, where they came from. And those are things like the loss of Blue Slip, which is our it's a program that's beloved in the store. If anybody were to get rid of it, there would be a riot. It basically allows us to get food that is close to its expiration date or on its expiration date first before it gets donated, as well as a reduction of our discount, which makes no sense, the elimination of my department, which is the floater department, a loss of our healthcare coverage, and I've even heard the argument that we're not owned by Good Food Holdings and eMart before, which is just a denial of reality. And really what that tells me is that people are telling these workers to be legitimately afraid of their benefits going away. And I can only imagine that these arguments came from the company. But to my second point, we might get into more detail there.
Yeah. So the mailer, I wanted to touch on that real quick. This is basically their equivalent of a captive audience meeting, isn't it? Because they can't in Oregon they can't mandate that you attend a captive audience meeting legally.
Yeah, as I understand it, they cannot. And in a way, it sort of served that same purpose, if you will. It provided all the same arguments, like I mentioned. It was basically cut and paste from any other company. Whole Foods has said very similar things. Amazon with ALU has said very similar things. So it was far from surprising to get that mailer, but it did have an impact. We heard from some people that were supporters that were a little bit concerned that some of these beloved benefits that the company gives us right now would go away as a result of the union. And really, the truth was, if we don't get the union, it's much more possible that these things could go away. But yeah, the mailer was very concerning, and it kind of was a captive audience, if you will.
And in terms of the things that they were doing, it sounds like they were doing a lot of things under the radar. Did you have any stories of people who were being like pulled to the side and talked to, like one-on-one meetings and that kind of thing?
Not that I can recall. It really was just a lot of posting paper up. I know the UFCW was quite surprised that people basically, all the workers in that store read everything that was posted on the board. And they said it's not very common that workers diligently read everything that's posted, but at our store we did. And so whenever the company posted information up in every department that said, here's the upcoming election, remember they can't promise you anything, here's how to vote and all that stuff, whenever they posted that information in every department, the company was able to, get away with putting that all around the store. And again, it was a really quiet strategy. And the other reasons, which I could get into next, might help clarify sort of the connection that I could make between the company and the actual outcome of the vote. The second big reason is, I think, the closest connection that I could see between the actions of the company and the actual outcome of the election. And so my second reason is specifically motivated individuals in our store. And this has to do with many people throughout the location. And I would imagine this would be the same case in other locations, who were very highly motivated to stop the election and created a very strong anti-union campaign that the likes of which I'm not familiar with at many other places. So the first of which, and the most concerning of which, being managers. There were managers in our store that violated the rules of impartiality, because managers were supposed to be completely impartial, to not show their hand, and to just allow the members of each department to make their decision independently. However, this didn't happen. There were managers throughout our store that were actively encouraging their employees to be extremely anti-union, that were slandering members of the organizing committee and painting us in a very childish manner throughout the entire election. And this obviously went unpunished, as well as several workers from different departments that were either related to management through familial ties, who act as management most of the time, even though they technically aren't, or who are very close friends with many people in the managerial staff, who acted on their behalf to scare and misinform others. We heard, like I said before, the arguments that we heard throughout the store about the loss of our beloved benefits, which have no basis whatsoever. We have to wonder where that came from, right? And so we believe that it was either from the direct edict of management, or just on behalf of management, let's say, that several people throughout the store spread these lies. And in addition to those lies, I mentioned rumors. There was a lot of rumor spreading throughout the store, especially during the latter half of the election, about how untrustworthy the org committee is, about how cliquey we were, about how exclusionary we were. And these really came from nowhere. We have no idea where they came from. There were even rumors going throughout the store that we were being paid. And I heard those from several workers, and that tells me that someone was spreading these rumors. There was even bullying of the pro-union at our location, to the point where people were taking off their buttons, taking off their supportive t-shirts, because they did not want to deal with the stress of being hounded at work in several departments. And of course, this did not stop. And so you could see some impartiality, or some partiality, I should say, the company being partial because they're not punishing instances of their managers or people acting on behalf of managers abusing their positions of power to try to push against the union.
Were these managers that you're specifically referring to, are they like lower level management? Or like hourly employees that were able to vote? Were they part of this voting pool, or was this coming directly from the top?
Assistant managers were allowed to vote in the election. This was a decision that was made pretty early on, and some of them are the people that I'm referring to, but also management directly. Managers of certain departments managed to get their entire department to vote against the union as a result of their argumentation and trying to propagandize their department. From what I can tell, many of these people that I'm referring to just like the company to an extent that they're willing to nuke a union campaign to try to protect the company, whether that's a financial incentive, whether that's a personal vendetta, or whatever it might be. These people absolutely abuse their power because they're supposed to be somebody that a worker can trust. And having spoken to many workers in these departments who were doubtful or on the fence, but might have also voted no or couldn't vote during the election, they found it quite astounding that this level of argumentation was being used when, it's something that basically would disenfranchise them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of just pure inoculation, was there any inoculation that kind of went into preparing people for this kind of stuff, the union busting, or was it kind of like you were just blindsided by it so badly that you didn't even know it was, because you had said earlier that it was a campaign that was just so intense that you weren't even expecting it to be this bad. But like, how was the inoculation in terms of this kind of stuff?
Yeah, many of the efforts of inoculation and trying to protect people from stuff like this happened before I got there, and continued while I was there, but only for a short time. Things like tabling. I have to give a massive shout out, by the way, to Ryan and Stephanie, who were the biggest organizers in this store, who no longer work at our location. But they were fantastic. I have to give credit to them because they were the people that were pushing for several years to get this thing going. And they were responsible for starting the union table outside the store, which was one of the biggest pieces of the election. I'll go into a brief diversion here. They would basically position a table in the parking lot at the other side of the store, and allow workers to come outside and speak to them about the union and give them real arguments for why they should be supporting the union effort. And it was a really effective strategy for a while because it prompted the store to take action. And that action was in the form of kicking them out of the parking lot, which happened a couple of times. But ultimately, one of the benefits of going with the UFCW was that they had lawyers on call and were able to protect Ryan and Stephanie and allow them to stay at their position in the parking lot because the company couldn't throw them out legally. But there were still rumors going around that we were pressuring people or bullying people or being mean or rude or not leaving people alone, which is just untrue. We kept better tabs on who we spoke to than even management probably does. We had a list of everybody in the store and how many times we spoke to them. So these rumors that went around, I think, were just kind of a replacement for an anti-union argument for some people, because some of these people like to believe that they're very pro-union. I heard that several times. I'm very pro-union generally, but, A, B, or C. And this was one of those reasons.
Yeah.
I find it so incredibly frustrating when companies will do this specifically, like try to say, oh, are those union people cornering you to try to talk to you about this? You don't have to talk to them. Don't let anybody bully you into this. And it's like, it puts the idea in somebody's head who may not be pro or anti-union, maybe just like fence sitting, not really sure what's going on, maybe doesn't have all of the information that they need to make an informed decision about it. And then when you approach them about it, it sets it up so that as soon as they're approached with somebody even discussing unionization in any type of way, they're thinking in the back of their minds, oh, I'm being bullied. Oh, I shouldn't be talking to this person about this. It's so insidious, and it frustrates the hell out of me that it's even legal.
That happened several times in the store. There were people that were totally open to speaking with us in the first couple months of the campaign. Mm-hmm. But as the time went on, and this might lead us into my third point, they started to hear those things from the company, like if you're being spoken to too much, or these rumors would spread around about us bullying people or pressuring people. They, after a couple of months of speaking to us or kind of being on the fence, completely closed off. Or some people that were yeses even flipped in the last few weeks of the election. It was very worrying. And it basically amounted to, because of what you're talking about, that sense of, oh, these people are approaching me, it's kind of poisoning the well, as it were, trying to say that these people that want you to speak for yourself and to speak up and to try to push for the union, they're really, they're being paid and they're trying to goat you into doing something. What that really did is it made it seem like team sports in the store. And in fact,
yes,
one of the biggest points of that is that the anti-campaign at our store, while very, nebulous and spearheaded by several different people in the store, was unified in that they had anti-union buttons that were created by one of the people that I'm speaking about in my second point. And those were worn by almost everybody that was against the election. And many people began to wear them during the latter half of the election as those rumors spread around. And so it was a very slow but effective, and again, very nebulous strategy to try to defeat the union based off of lies and baseless rumors.
So before the actual campaign started, what was the before and after like in the store? So, before the campaign started, was there a decent amount of support for the union? And then, like, it sounds like as it kind of gradually pushed through, things started to shift. Does that sound right?
Yeah, so again, I came in pretty late. So I'm gathering this understanding from members of the organizing committee and from members of 555 that helped us. But I think this transitions really well into my third point. The third reason why I think we lost this election is the snail's pace of the National Labor Relations Board here in Oregon. The election process took almost a year, as I understand it, in total, and there were several years before that that this was in the works. And then, of course, from what I can remember, it was about 7 months from filing date to voting date. And that gave the company a lot of time to devise a strategy, to post up propaganda. And of course, it made people very tired of the election. And so those arguments, that poisoning of the well, when it comes to the union organizers trying to speak to people, became even more effective. And there was a lot of support when the election first came around, and when Ryan and Stephanie were kicked out of the parking lot initially. People were very up in arms about that because Ryan and Stephanie had great reputations in the store. Not with management, mind you, but with the actual workers. And many people were very upset about that. And there were several people throughout the store that signed union cards on that fact alone, that Ryan was kicked out of the parking lot because they thought that was unfair and that he should be able to speak his mind. And so in the early months of the election, after the filing day, people were very excited. There was a sense that something was happening, that things were changing for the better, and especially for those employees that had been there for, the store just turned 21, for all 21 years. They realized that things were changing, and that was very promising for them. But as the months went by and we had nothing from the NLRB, we were just waiting for a date. People got very tired of it. Of the election, as you can imagine. This happens very commonly. The longer it takes, the worse the union tends to do, because it gives the company more time and it makes people very tired of the lengthy process. And it allowed for those rumors to spread, for those lies to spread, and for these motivated people in the store to continue to make these arguments, and to basically argue to workers as well that we weren't actually doing anything because we hadn't had a date yet, or that we were being largely ineffective. So I think that's the third reason why we lost.
Let's slide right into the fourth reason why you think led to the election being the way that it came out.
Yes, so the fourth and final reason that I give for the election, and of course I think this is least impactful, but I still do think it had an impact, especially after the Seven Corners outcome, is the UFCW's reputation. As has been mentioned before, and anybody who has worked with Safeway or Albertsons out here in Oregon, UFCW Local 555 has a pretty bad reputation from years past. There was a previous drive at New Seasons in 2017, and that drive went very badly. It was essentially a fumble of the election. The details I'm not super familiar with, but as I understand it from NSLU organizers, they were very upset at the way UFCW 555 represented. And one of the biggest reasons why is because their strategy over the last 20 years, 30 years, I believe, has been focused mostly on company appeasement. I've heard a saying in regards to their strategy, which was, if the company is happy, everyone's happy, which isn't true. And a greater rank and file strategy has sort of been on the rise at UFCW. They've been trying to rotate out their leadership. They've been trying to hire more rank and file workers to actually be their organizers. But this is a relatively new phenomenon. And so many people don't know or don't have the proof yet that 555 has been able to change. And so several people at our location had previous bad experiences at Hagen, for example. I'm not sure if they were 555 or just labor union, but at Hagen or at Safeway or at Albertsons, and they said, I don't want to deal with 555. And it's a little bit understandable for me, because it would have been a leap of faith into a new and reformed UFCW, but I did see the reform personally. Having worked with people at 555 for the time that I did, I could tell you that I saw it. I could see that they were trying to make a change legitimately. But other people in our store didn't get to see that, or they didn't even try. They were just so anti-555 that they didn't care whatsoever. They didn't want to hear anything that they had to say. And so their reputation absolutely preceded them during this election. We lost a few votes off of that basis, and because the company was allowed to make that third-party argument that we love so much about the the union intervening in our lovely family because they're an outside force trying to manipulate you, so to speak. New Seasons Labor Union obviously didn't have that problem, and Seven Corners did win their election following ours, so it shows me that a rank-and-file strategy, working from the ground up to build something brand new, absolutely has some appeal. But again, I want to stress that from what I could see, 555 was absolutely trying to make a change. They're wonderful people there. And really, one more thing I'd like to add, which not everybody is familiar with, is the reason why we went with UFCW 555 versus NSLU was actually just a two ships passing in the night type thing, to clarify that point. Ryan and the other organizers, at the time they chose who to represent them, weren't aware of New Seasons Labor Union and wanted to have access to larger resources, so they went with the larger union. But my point being that 555 and SLU absolutely have their differences, but I think that reconciling those and trying to commonly fight against New Seasons and trying to make New Seasons what it should be is really the goal here.
I will say it's really interesting seeing the difference in talking points between what these companies will say when there's a bigger union involved versus when there's a new union. Like, for example, the Amazon Labor Union, they use the same talking points that I saw for the New Seasons union. The same anti-union talking points. They were saying things like, well, this is a new union. They've never negotiated a contract. And they use the same talking points with Amazon Labor Union that they use with the New Seasons union. So it's just interesting to see the differences, in the talking points that they'll use between these, the newer unions, because they don't really have a lot to say, they can't, it's not like they can go back and they can find years worth of whatever with the New Seasons union or even the Amazon union. It's just, it was created like a year ago, like the Amazon union, and like with the New Seasons union, it was created like, less than a year ago. So it's like, what are you really going to go back and find? So the only argument they have is, well, they're a new union. They've never negotiated a contract before.
Exactly. And they'll pull anything out of a hat to, try to bust the union. They'll come up with anything, whether it be the third party argument or the brand new to the game argument. And that argument manifested in arguments that I heard several times throughout workers that, we can't negotiate a healthcare contract. The UFCW's healthcare contract is worse, so therefore ours will be the same as Safeway or Albertsons, which makes no sense. There's definitely a difference between the two stores, and it's funny that on the mailer it was basically a table with each argument, things that the union can't do or things that the company does better because they're so perfect. And they had just two separate categories that said, here's the argument for NSLU, and then next column, here's the argument against UFCW. And it's like, you couldn't make two mailers for the two stores. Kind of lazy, but I could see it.
Well, another thing that I hate about that whole third-party argument, because when we were organizing at No Evil Foods, like, we were trying to organize with the UFCW as well. And that was one of, like, the major talking points. Do you want a third party representing you? We want to be able to talk to you one-on-one. We don't want to cease communication with you. We love you. We're family. And it's like, it's just so frustrating to me. And I know that you're aware of this, but it's like the union is not a third party. Like, the union itself is the workers. So it just, for me, it's like it negates all of those arguments where it's like, oh, well, the UFCW did this back in 1995. Do you want them representing you? Like, it's like, even if the UFCW did do something that nobody was on board with, the union is you guys. Like, there's channels to go through where you'd be able to kind of navigate around those kinds of issues. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't be represented by the union. I just get so angry with that whole third-party argument, because it'll scare people away who aren't familiar with unions and familiar with organizing. It'll immediately scare them away when they hear about this spooky, like, scary, corrupted third party, when in reality, it's just you and your coworkers coming up with this stuff.
Yes, exactly. And the argument that won us a couple of votes throughout the process was to say, hey, if there's something in the upcoming contract, if we win this union, that you don't like, then don't vote for it. And many people said, wait, that's something you can do? We can vote down the contract? And it's like, many people lack this education about what a labor union is, and that's intentionally done to try to favor corporate entities and to try to stop them, labor unions, from forming. And so when people heard that, they were very surprised, pleasantly surprised, and many of them were won over by that argument. And so the fact that the company would willingly spread this misinformation and to try to tell people that you never know what will happen, if the union happens, it could upend your entire life, that this is why I don't necessarily blame any of the workers at my store. And I have big respect for all of them. Everybody that I've met there is fantastic. The reason why I don't blame any one person is just because I think that many of these workers that voted no were legitimately afraid of losing what they had, because New Seasons does offer some benefits that a company like Kroger would not, especially not without a union contract. And those benefits are pretty nice. Working there has been pretty nice for me. It's a better job than Starbucks, I can tell you that. And there are really good reasons for that. And so many people were just legitimately afraid that what they knew and loved would go away. They thought that if the union was put into place, that everything would collapse, that it would cause complete destruction of the company or of what it's supposed to represent. And there's only one reason why people would believe that. And that's if the company was specifically pushing for this belief. And of course, I think that there are several people throughout the store that were reinforcing that belief on the ground, because managers were supposed to stay impartial, and for the most part they did. But it really, I'll say it again, I've said it before, poisoning the well was really how it felt. It felt like as the course of the election went through, people were lost to the fact that they were propagandized. They were told that everything would go away. And so it's, with that context and with all these reasons put in place, it's understandable why we lost the election, but it doesn't mean that the fight's over.
The election results are being challenged, right?
The results are being challenged. We have several ULPs that were filed as a result of some of the things that I've talked about and more. But those obviously won't change the outcome, from what I can understand. Maybe they will. Maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised. But from what I can understand, it's more of a delaying. It's more of a strategy type thing. We want to give the most support we can to New Seasons Labor Union, because they deserve it and because this company deserves to change. So I don't think it'll change the outcome of the election, but we definitely have our grievances.
So what are the next steps, actually? What are the next steps for organizing? And if you're moving towards another union push, do you think you're going to go with the UFCW again, or are you going to maybe go with the New Seasons Labor Union?
Right. I think the best step forward is to just go with NSLU. First of all, because they have already won an election, and second, because I believe that they will continue to win their elections downtown. Not to say that I don't appreciate the UFCW and everything they've done for us. They've been fantastic to me and to the rest of the org committee and to all the workers at my store over the past few months. But really, the next steps for me have kind of already started. As soon as we lost, I found that it was really important for me to go to all of our supporters in each department. And since I'm a floater, I get to go all around the store and to just talk to them about what happened, how they were feeling, and to try to explain to them the reasons why we lost this election. It's really how I've come up with this list. Because I think it's really important to not just have all those discussions, all those organizing discussions drop off a cliff as soon as the election doesn't go through. So I've been trying to explain this to people, and really what that's done is that it's made people that understand the truth about the way the company acts and its history and the changes over the years and its shortcomings. It's sort of revived something in them, if you will. It's made them more spirited, more encouraged to try to fight for the future and to support New Seasons Labor Union in whatever way they can. And that's really my biggest mission, is to try to support them. I'm trying to spend some time going downtown to connect to different stores, to try and warn people that even though the strategy might be quiet, it might be that 12 of your yeses turn at the last second, and you might not know why. So an election could go anywhere. If our election shows anything, we expected 52 yeses on the day of. Anything can happen. And I think it's really important to prepare for the worst case scenario for other stores, because this company absolutely needs a union. What I heard so many times throughout the company is, I love unions except for our store because it's perfect. But it's not. No company is perfect. There's always going to be a capitalist race to the bottom. We can already see the strategies forming of trying to become more like Kroger, trying to become more like Amazon. So you never know where a company is going to go. As wonderful as they might seem, as friendly as they might seem, as good as this might be compared to a previous job, we have to work to make the job the best that it can be. Because if New Seasons wants to be the friendliest store in town, it's got to live up to that name. And from what I saw during the election process, it absolutely failed to meet that expectation.
And another thing too that I think is really important to point out here, based on what you just said, especially for other stores that might be in the process of unionizing or thinking about it, all of the great things that they have could be taken away tomorrow if they don't have it in a contract. All of these, I mean, because these companies, they love to go post up their benefits and say, well, you get this, you get that, you get all of these perks from working here. Why do you need a union? And it's because that whole list that you just made of things that are great about working at your store, none of that is guaranteed.
Exactly. And one of the things that I neglected to mention on that note is some of the actions the company took as soon as the election was announced. As soon as we had filed with UFCW 555, early on in the process, the company made several changes that we had filed ULPs over, which were basically strategies to show workers, oh, you don't need a union because everything is perfect and wonderful here. And one of the actions they took is to increase our discount from 20% to 30%. And we believe that was a strategy to try to tell people the company is quote unquote willing to change, if you will, or willing to buy us out. And these things could, again, like you said, go away at any moment. There were a couple other things that they did to try to appease the workers. They tried to listen to us a little bit, to lax up on attendance policy, to lax up on I'm trying to think of the word, on disciplinary discussions and things like that, to try to show that they were willing to change if only we would speak to HR. But again, like you say, at a moment's notice, they can change that, because a contract, all it really does is it allows you to have a veto on what the company decides to do. And we need that.
Yeah. In terms of advice that you might give other people out there who might be thinking about unionizing, what would you say to them? And then kind of also on that note, what do you think you might have done differently if you could have gone back and done this campaign again?
Right. So one of the things that I mentioned before is that many of our yeses flipped on the day of the election, or as far as we knew. And there was extremely high turnout at our store, which means that the no campaign was doing a magnificent job of whipping votes. I think as much as we thought that we had spoken to everybody in the store as much as we could have, I think that we really needed to dig our heels in a little bit more. That we needed to ensure that our supporters weren't wavering and not just trying to dismiss us because they were very tired of the process and didn't want to get spoken to anymore. So many of them, as we understand it now, had said yes simply to stop the conversation. And that's a very scary thing, because you don't really know if it's happening to you until the election comes around. So it's really important to avoid that the best you can. And I think that the best way to do that is to continue to have reinforcing conversations and to continue to listen to workers, to hear out their stories, because if they feel like they're listened to, they're much more likely to trust you. And hopefully with that trust, you can break some of that poisoning that has come from the anti-campaign, that personal sort of attack about how evil or mean or bullying we are as people. And I think it's also just to very closely monitor each department. It's really important to have organizers that get to see what happens in every department, because I know that our election before I came around was mostly spearheaded by the front end. And so they didn't quite get to see what happened in the bakery, in the meat department, in the deli. And so making sure that you have people in every single department that can keep an eye on things is really important, because even with my presence, we lost entire departments, as I mentioned, to managerial staff propagandizing their departments. So that's something that we have to keep an eye on to try to combat that propaganda. and ultimately just building a sense of solidarity in the store and trying to combat that sense of hopelessness, that sense that nothing will change or that the election is just team sports. There's a lot of really negative vibes that can come around from a very long, drawn-out process. So I think that we could have better found a way to keep encouraging people to create more spectacle, to make it feel like things were happening, because it's clear that when things were happening, when there was drama even at the store, like Ryan being kicked out of the parking lot, or when we got our election date, support was up. So we needed to show people that things were still happening. And I think that having a more visible strategy like that to all the workers, I'm not sure how we would go about doing that, would have been a great detail as well.
Okay. And now, to kind of wrap this up, what if anything, can our listeners do to support you and the continued efforts at New Seasons? And where can we follow updates about any future campaigns with you guys or any other campaigns?
Yeah, of course. So I'm throwing my full support, obviously, behind New Seasons Labor Union, because I think this company deserves to be unionized, because it's very clear the path that they're on right now, the trajectory that they're on. So the support that the community should have is for New Seasons Labor Union. Of course, they won their election at Seven Corners, which is off a division in Southeast Portland. So maybe if you're nearby there, stop by and say hi and tell them that you support them. For anybody else in the Portland area, there are a couple other stores that are coming up. Slabtown in downtown Portland has a vote coming up. Woodstock is next, and there are other stores in the works, which, as I understand it, we're not at liberty to talk about yet. But there are many other stores, as far as New Seasons goes, that want to come next because they want to try their hand at the union election, because the type of people that work at these stores, they tend to be very highly educated. They tend to be very socially progressive, because that's the image the company puts forward. And so I think it's only inevitable that these types of things happen. And if you want to keep up with it outside of the Portland area, of course, New Seasons Labor Union has a Twitter page, has a public Instagram page that they're constantly posting to. And I think it was a really big strategy for them during the election, too. Props to that. Having a good social media campaign was fantastic, and they continue to. So follow them on their social media. Try to get things moving, because this company really needs better representation for the workers.
I think that about wraps everything up. Was there anything else that you wanted to add? Anything that we might have missed that you wanted to mention?
No, I think that's the long and short of it. I really hope that the UFCW 555 and the NSLU can reconcile their differences and fight for something better, because I know there was some bad blood between the two, but I really want to see them come together and fight the common enemy, which is New Seasons corporate.
Yeah. Absolutely. At the end of the day, we all need to be on the same team. Like, the other unions are not the enemy, and they shouldn't be.
Exactly.
At the end of the day.
Yeah.
Well, we want to thank you so much for coming on to talk to us and taking the time to break down what went wrong. A lot of times we're talking to people who have had victories, and it's always nice to have that kind of yeah, haha, we won. This is what went right. This is great. Come to this rally. When on the flip side, I mean, these are also really important discussions that need to happen where, organizers are talking about, what went wrong, what would I do differently, all of that kind of stuff. So we really, really appreciate you breaking all of that down for us, and your continued effort to organize even after this loss is nothing short of inspiring, and we can't wait to see what better things are going to come for New Seasons Labor Union and for you as well.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah,
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.